The morning mist clings to the hills of KwaZulu-Natal. In the royal kraal, Shaka Kona stands triumphant, the lion of the Zulu nation, feared by enemies across the continent. His warriors bow before him, their assegais gleaming in the dawn light. But watch closely. Behind the great king, in the shadows of his glory, stands his most trusted companion. The man who has shared his victories, his secrets, his blood. The warrior who would die for his king. Or so Shaka believes. Because what the Lion King cannot see is the darkness growing in his brother's heart. The blade being sharpened not for enemies, but for the throne itself. The loyalty that once burned bright now turns cold as morning steel. This is not a story of conquest. This is not about battles won or territories claimed. This is about something far more dangerous, the moment when absolute trust transforms into absolute betrayal. When the closest warrior becomes the deadliest enemy. When brotherhood dies and with it, a kingdom trembles. The question that haunts history echoes through these hills. How does a bond forged in blood become the very blade that spills it? To understand this betrayal, you must first witness what Shaka built. A kingdom born from chaos, carved with spear and shield into the most feared military power Southern Africa had ever seen. The year is 1816. Shaka seizes the Zulu chieftainship and begins his transformation. He revolutionizes warfare itself, abandoning the throwing spear for the close combat assegai. The bullhorn formation encircles enemies like death's embrace. His warriors don't just fight. They become instruments of his will. Regiment after regiment falls into perfect discipline. The Amazulu, the people of heaven, expand their territory through conquest and absorption. Shaka's military innovations spread terror across the Highveld. Entire tribes flee before his advancing impis. But greatness demands sacrifice. Shaka's reforms are brutal. Warriors must remain celibate until proven in battle. Failure means death. Cowardice means death. Even retreating to tend wounds can mean death. The king's word becomes absolute law. His justice swift and merciless. A pointed finger decides life or death for thousands. The royal kraal becomes a place where whispered doubts can end in blood. Among all the fierce warriors in Shaka's army, one stands apart. Not because he towers above others, though he does. Not because his spear finds its mark, though it always does. But because he alone shares the king's burden. His name is spoken with reverence. Dingan Kona, Shaka's half-brother, his shadow, his sword. Their bond was forged in the crucible of early struggles. When Shaka was an outcast prince, mocked by his own people, Dingan believed in his vision. When others saw only an illegitimate son with strange ideas about warfare, Dingan saw a future king. Together, they perfected the close combat techniques that would revolutionize Zulu warfare. Side by side, they tested the bullhorn formation that would crush their enemies. In the darkness before dawn, they planned the campaigns that would build an empire. Dingan became more than a warrior, he became Shaka's confidant, the one person who could speak truth to power. The brother who understood both the burden of leadership and the weight of royal blood. In battle, they moved as one mind. Shaka's strategic brilliance combined with Dingan's tactical execution created an unstoppable force. Their enemies learned to fear not just the Zulu king, but the shadow who stood beside him. But perhaps most importantly, Dingan was the keeper of Shaka's humanity. When the king's fury threatened to consume everything, his brother could calm the storm. When absolute power began to corrupt absolutely, Dingan remained the voice of reason. Until he could no longer bear what his brother had become. Power changes men. And absolute power changed Shaka in ways that chilled even his closest allies. The transformation began subtly, a harsher punishment here, a more brutal execution there. Shaka's justice, once swift but fair, became arbitrary and cruel. Warriors died not for cowardice, but for failing to read the king's mood. Dingaan watched his brother become someone he barely recognized. The visionary leader who once inspired loyalty through respect now ruled through terror alone. The man who once valued wise counsel now surrounded himself with fearful yes-men. The breaking point came during the Great Drought of 1827. As crops failed and cattle died, Shaka declared that rain would not fall until his grief for his mother Nandi was properly expressed. He forbade the planting of crops. No milk could be consumed. Any woman found pregnant would be executed along with her husband. Dingaan saw the madness in his brother's eyes. This wasn't grief, this was tyranny wearing grief's mask. While the king mourned, his people starved. While Shaka demanded impossible demonstrations of sorrow, children died of hunger. For the first time, Dingaan questioned his loyalty. Was this the vision they had fought for? Was this the kingdom they had built with their blood and brotherhood? Late at night, in whispered conversations with other concerned leaders, Dingaan began to voice what others only thought. The kingdom needed saving. But saving it meant confronting the very man who had created it. The warrior's loyalty began its slow, agonizing death. September 22, 1828, a date that would echo through Zulu history like thunder across the hills. The plan is simple, elegant, brutal. Dingaan has convinced two other half-brothers, Mylangana and Impand, that action must be taken. They cannot let Shaka's madness destroy everything their people have built. The king sits in his royal kraal, holding court as usual. Around him, the familiar faces of his advisors and warriors. The afternoon sun casts long shadows across the courtyard. Everything appears normal. But tension crackles in the air like lightning before a storm. Dingaan approaches his brother. For a moment, their eyes meet, and in that instant, Shaka sees the truth. The recognition flickers across the king's face. Surprise, betrayal, perhaps even understanding. The assegai strikes swift and sure. Not from the front in honest combat, but from behind, the ultimate dishonor for a warrior king. Mylangana delivers the second blow, then the third. The lion of the Zulu nation falls not to enemy spears or foreign bullets, but to the weapons of his own blood. The man who trusted absolutely dies by absolute betrayal. In those final moments, as life ebbs from the greatest military mind Africa had ever produced, Shaka gasps his last words. "Are you stabbing me, kings of the earth? You will come to an end through killing one another." A prophecy, a curse, a warning that would haunt the royal house for generations to come. The shadow beside the throne had finally struck. Brotherhood lay dead in the dust. The news spreads like wildfire through the royal kraal. Shaka Kasenzengakona, the immortal king, the lion who could not be killed, lies dead, murdered by his own brothers. Chaos erupts instantly. Some warriors loyal to Shaka's memory reach for their weapons, ready to avenge their fallen king. Others, secretly relieved that the tyrant's reign is over, lay down their arms. The great military machine that Shaka built with such precision begins to fracture along lines of loyalty and fear. Dingaan moves quickly to consolidate power. He declares himself king, claiming that Shaka's madness had forced their hand. The assassination wasn't murder, it was liberation. They had saved the kingdom from a tyrant who would have destroyed everything in his grief-fueled rage. But power seized through betrayal is power built on quicksand. The same royal council that had bowed to Shaka now views Dingaan with suspicion. If he could kill one brother, what would stop him from killing others? The Zulu military, once unified under Shaka's iron discipline, splinters into competing factions. Some regiments accept Dingaan's rule. Others question the legitimacy of a king who gained his throne through fraternal murder. The bullhorn formation that once crushed enemies now turns inward, threatening civil war. Trade routes that had flourished under Shaka's protection become uncertain. Neighboring tribes, once cowed by Zulu might, begin to test the kingdom's weakened borders. The empire's enemies sense opportunity in the chaos. Within months, the kingdom that had seemed unshakable begins to crack. The betrayal that was meant to save the Zulu nation had instead doomed it to decades of instability. History remembers Dingaan as both savior and traitor. The question that haunts us across centuries remains: was the killing of Shaka an act of necessary courage or unforgivable betrayal? Consider the evidence for liberation. Shaka's final years were marked by increasing paranoia and cruelty. His policies during the drought would have led to mass starvation. His arbitrary executions were destroying the very foundation of Zulu society. Perhaps Dingaan saved thousands of lives by taking one. The warrior king had become a tyrant. The visionary had become a madman. Someone had to act before the kingdom collapsed under the weight of its ruler's insanity. Dingaan, as the closest to power, bore the terrible responsibility of decisive action. But the case for betrayal is equally compelling. Shaka had unified dozens of tribes into a powerful nation. His military innovations had protected the Zulu from annihilation by expanding colonial forces. His harsh discipline had forged strength from chaos. Perhaps his grief-induced policies would have ended naturally, leaving the kingdom stronger than ever. More damning still is the method: assassination from behind. No chance for single combat. No opportunity for the king to defend himself or reform his ways. The murder violated every code of honor that Zulu warriors held sacred. More damning still is the method: assassination from behind. No chance for single combat. No opportunity for the king to defend himself or reform his ways. The murder violated every code of honor that Zulu warriors held sacred. The moral complexity deepens when we consider the consequences. Dingaan's rule brought its own cruelties and failures. His eventual conflict with the Voortrekkers led to devastating losses. The kingdom Shaka built began its slow decline toward colonial domination. Was this liberation or just the exchange of one flawed ruler for another? Shaka's dying words echo across the centuries with chilling prescience. You will come to an end through killing one another. He saw, in his final moments, the curse he was placing on his royal house. History proved him right. Dingaan would rule for 12 years before facing his own betrayal and assassination. The cycle of fraternal murder would continue, weakening the Zulu kingdom just as colonial forces pressed ever closer. The very violence that brought Dingaan to power would ultimately destroy him. But Shaka's warning reaches beyond the royal kraal of 1828. It speaks to a truth that every leader, every friendship, every alliance must confront. Absolute trust makes absolute betrayal possible. The strongest fortress falls not to enemy siege, but to gates open from within. The mightiest king dies not on the battlefield, but in his own court. The deepest wound comes not from a stranger's blade, but from a brother's hand. Perhaps this is why Shaka's story still haunts us. Because we all have our Dingaans, those closest to us who know our weaknesses, who could destroy us if they chose. And we all have our Shakas, those we follow until their power corrupts them beyond recognition. The question Shaka's death forces us to confront is uncomfortable. When does loyalty become complicity? When does obedience become cowardice? And when does the trusted blade become necessary? What do you think? Was Dingaan a liberator or a traitor? Share your thoughts below, and if this story of brotherhood and betrayal has gripped you, subscribe for more tales from Africa's hidden history. Because the most dangerous enemies are always the ones we trust most. Remember Shaka's warning. And watch your shadows.